I can't believe it's been over 10 years since my parents abandoned me. It still feels surreal sometimes when I think about how I was just 12 years old when they shipped me off to live with my Uncle Matt in the countryside. My parents, both successful doctors, decided that I was more of a burden than a child. I wasn't as bright or academically gifted as my twin sister Jess, and in their eyes, that made me useless. Jess was everything they wanted: smart, driven, and always excelling in school. But me, I was just average. I tried hard, but school wasn't my thing. I was more into creative pursuits, drawing, acting, anything outside the rigid world of academia my parents cherished so much. But that didn't matter to them. They made it clear every single day that I wasn't good enough. When you grow up in a family of overachievers, being average feels like a curse. I was constantly compared to Jess, and even though she never rubbed it in my face, the pressure was suffocating. I remember how things got worse as we entered middle school. My grades slipped, and I started falling behind. It wasn't because I wasn't trying, I really was. But no matter how much effort I put in, I just couldn't meet the expectations my parents set for me. The teachers at school didn't help either. They saw me as lazy and unmotivated because they didn't know what was happening at home. They didn't see how every night I would lie in bed, crying myself to sleep, wondering why I couldn't just be more like Jessica. My parents were relentless. Every dinner conversation turned into a lecture about how I needed to work harder, about how I was embarrassing them, while Jess sat quietly, absorbing all the praise. I was a disappointment, and they didn't hesitate to remind me of that every chance they got. They loved Jess openly and unconditionally, but with me, it was as if I was invisible unless they needed someone to blame. The night everything fell apart was still vivid in my memory. We were at dinner and my parents were laying into me again about my grades. I had failed another math test and they were furious. I'd had enough. I snapped, yelling back at them for the first time in my life, telling them that they were the reason I was struggling so much. They didn't care though. They grounded me for 2 weeks and told me I needed to fix my attitude. That night I decided to run away. I wasn't thinking clearly, just desperate to escape. So I grabbed a jacket and left the house, wandering aimlessly until I ended up at the park near our neighborhood. I sat there in the dark, shivering and terrified, wondering what I had done and if anyone even cared that I was gone. The hours dragged on, and eventually, the police found me sitting on a bench around 5 a.m. They took me back home, but instead of being worried or concerned, my parents were angry that I had caused them more trouble. That's when they made the decision. They were sending me away. A few days later, they told me I'd be going to live with my Uncle Matt and Aunt Sarah in the countryside. I begged them not to send me away. I promised I'd do better and that I'd make them proud, but it didn't matter. They had already made up their minds. They said they didn't have time to deal with someone as useless as me when they had Jess to focus on. That was the last straw for me. Jess was the only one who had ever been kind to me in that house, and even though I was angry and hurt, I didn't want to leave her behind. But my parents wouldn't even let her come with us when they dropped me off at Uncle Matt's house. I cried the whole ride there, knowing this wasn't just a punishment. It was abandonment. When I first arrived at my uncle and aunt's house, I felt completely lost. I cried for weeks, calling my parents constantly, begging them to take me back. But they never answered. I'll never forget the day I realized they weren't going to pick up the phone again. My Uncle Matt and Aunt Sarah were so kind and patient with me, but I was still a mess. They understood what I was going through and tried their best to make me feel welcome, but nothing could fill the emptiness I felt from being rejected by my own parents. Eventually, I stopped trying to contact them. I knew they weren't coming back for me, but Jess, she never gave up on me. She was my lifeline. Even though our parents didn't allow her to talk to me, she found ways to stay in touch. We would secretly talk on the phone when they weren't home, or she would sneak onto social media to message me. Knowing I still had her in my life was the only thing that kept me going during those first few years. Living with Uncle Matt and Aunt Sarah turned out to be a blessing in disguise. They didn't pressure me like my parents had, and for the first time in my life, I started to feel like I could just be myself. I wasn't great at school, but I wasn't failing either. My uncle and aunt encouraged me to explore my creative interests, letting me join school plays and sports teams, things my parents had always forbidden because they thought they would distract me from my studies. I made friends, learned to enjoy life, and began to heal. That's also how I met Nick, my husband. We met in high school and he quickly became my best friend. He understood me in ways no one else ever had, and we stuck together through everything. We ended up going to the same college, graduated last year, and just a week after we both got our diplomas, we got married. Now we have a beautiful baby boy, and we live just a few streets away from Uncle Matt and Aunt Sarah. We visit them all the time, and they've become my true family. The ones who actually cared about me when my own parents couldn't be bothered. Jesus and I are still close, despite everything that happened. She's always been there for me, even when it wasn't easy for her. She was my maid of honor at my wedding, and she's my son's godmother now. A couple of weeks ago, while visiting, Jess told me something that took me by surprise. Our parents were planning to reach out to me. They didn't know about my life now, about Nick or our baby, because Jess had kept it all from them. She didn't think they deserved to know after what they'd done, and I agreed. But now, after 10 years of silence, they wanted to reconnect. I wasn't sure how to feel when Jess told me. On the one hand, a part of me had always wondered if they regretted abandoning me, if they ever realized how much they hurt me. On the other hand, I knew that no apology could undo the damage they'd caused. Jess said they hadn't exactly apologized, they just wanted to visit. That hurt. No apology, no acknowledgement of the pain they caused, just a casual request to drop by like we were long-lost friends. A couple of days later, they finally messaged me. It was short and cold, asking if they could come over to see me. No apologies, no warmth. It was as if they hadn't abandoned me for the past decade, as if everything was perfectly normal. I thought about ignoring the message, but then I had an idea. I decided to let them come, not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I wanted them to see how much better my life had become without them. I had a loving husband, a beautiful son, and an amazing support system in Uncle Matt and Aunt Sarah. I didn't need them anymore, and I wanted them to know that. So I invited them over for dinner. What they didn't know was that Uncle Matt, Aunt Sarah, Jessica, Nick, and my baby would all be there too. It wasn't just going to be a simple dinner. It was going to be an introduction to the family I had built without them. The weekend came faster than I expected, and with it, the awkward dinner I had planned. Nick and I had prepared the house, making sure everything was perfect. Jess, Uncle Matt, and Aunt Sarah arrived first. They didn't know yet that I had invited my parents, so I decided to wait until they got here before breaking the news. Part of me was nervous about their reaction, but the other part, the part still hurt and bitter about what my parents had done, wanted to see how it would all play out. When my parents finally arrived, the tension in the air was almost suffocating. It had been 10 years since I last saw them, but they looked exactly the same. My mom still had that cool, distant expression she always wore, and my dad, well, he barely looked at me when they walked in. Jess, Uncle Matt, and Aunt Sarah exchanged confused looks, clearly not expecting this reunion. I greeted my parents politely, though I could feel my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. There was no warmth in their hug, no emotion in their faces, just a sort of detached curiosity, as if they were visiting a stranger's home. I introduced them to Nick and then to our son, whose presence seemed to surprise them the most. I could tell they hadn't expected me to be married, much less a mother, and I took some satisfaction in watching their surprise unfold. The dinner was uncomfortable, to say the least. My parents tried to make small talk, asking superficial questions about my life and what I'd been up to, but they never once mentioned what had happened all those years ago. No apology, no acknowledgement of the pain they caused me. Just empty words about how nice my house was and how cute my baby looked. It was as if they were trying to pretend the past didn't exist, like we were just picking up where we left off. I could see the awkwardness in Uncle Matt and Aunt Sarah's faces too. They hadn't spoken to my parents since the day I was dropped off at their doorstep, and I knew they had no interest in rekindling any sort of relationship. They were here for me, to support me through this strange, forced reunion. Jess, on the other hand, was quiet, watching the entire interaction unfold with a mix of curiosity and unease. Finally, as we sat down to dinner, I couldn't hold back any longer. I raised my glass for a toast. The tension in the room thickened as I stood up. Everyone's eyes were on me, including my parents, who looked somewhat confused by the gesture. "I just want to say how grateful I am," I started, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "These past 10 years have been some of the best of my life. I wouldn't be here without the love and support of Uncle Matt, Aunt Sarah, Jess, and of course Nick." I saw my parents exchange a glance and I continued, not holding back the bitterness in my words. "They quote, "We've been my family in every way that counts. I wouldn't have made it this far without them. I'm proud of the life I've built with them by my side." I could feel everyone tense up, knowing exactly where this was going. I didn't care. I was done pretending. "And now," I said, turning to my parents, "I'd like to introduce you to my new family. The silence that followed was deafening. My dad's face hardened, and my mom's eyes filled with something like shock. I knew they hadn't expected me to be so direct, but I wanted them to feel the weight of what they had done, to understand that they had no place in the life I had built. My mom's lips trembled for a moment, and then suddenly she burst into tears. I hadn't expected that. She stood up so quickly her chair nearly fell over, and before anyone could say a word, she ran out of the room, sobbing. My dad, as cold and composed as ever, stood up slowly, his jaw clenched, but he didn't say a word. He just nodded once in my direction before following my mom out of the house. The room was silent again, but this time the tension was unbearable. I stood there feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. I wanted them to feel the hurt they had caused me, but seeing my mom break down like that left me feeling unsettled. Jessica was the first to speak, her voice soft and unsure. Was that really necessary? I didn't answer right away, but I could see the concern in her eyes. Nick reached out, placing his hand on mine, trying to calm me down. Uncle Matt and Aunt Sarah stayed quiet, clearly uncomfortable with what had just happened. "I don't know," I finally admitted, sitting down heavily in my chair. "Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but they needed to hear it. We finished the dinner in silence. No one stayed for dessert, and honestly, I was relieved. The night had become heavier than I intended, and I didn't want to drag it out any longer. Uncle Matt and Aunt Sarah left soon after, hugging me tightly before they walked out the door, while Jess stayed behind to talk. "I get why you're angry," she said, sitting next to me in the living room. "They hurt you. I know they did. But what happened tonight, I don't know. I just feel like it didn't have to be that way." I sighed, leaning back against the couch. I didn't plan for it to go like that. But seeing them here, pretending like nothing happened, it made me so mad, Jess. They abandoned me. They didn't care about me for 10 years. I couldn't let them get away with that. Jessica nodded, but she still looked conflicted. "I get it, I do, but maybe you should have just ignored them instead of inviting them here if this was how you felt. Maybe," I said quietly. "But I wanted them to see that I didn't need them, that I'm better off without them." Nick joined us, wrapping his arm around my shoulders. "You did what you needed to do," he said gently. "Don't beat yourself up about it. They had this coming." I didn't know how to feel. Part of me was relieved that I had finally confronted them, but another part of me felt uneasy about the whole situation. I hadn't expected my mom to react so emotionally, and now I couldn't stop thinking about her sobs as she ran out of my house. It wasn't supposed to feel this complicated. The days that followed the dinner were a strange mix of quiet and tension. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. My mom's tears, my dad's silence, the way Jess looked at me afterward. I had expected some sort of confrontation, maybe even anger from my parents, but instead they left in shock. I wasn't sure if I felt vindicated or if I had taken things too far. Nick tried to comfort me, saying that what happened needed to happen. "You confronted them after all these years," he reminded me one evening. "They never apologized. They never owned up to what they did. You had the right to speak your truth." I appreciated his support, but the guilt still lingered, gnawing at me in the quiet moments. I knew I needed to speak to my uncle and aunt about what had happened. They had been caught in the middle of this awkward reunion, and I felt bad for dragging them into it without warning. So a few days later, I called Uncle Matt. He picked up after a few rings, his voice warm but cautious. "Hey, kiddo, how are you holding up?" I sighed, not even sure where to start. "I'm okay, I guess. I wanted to talk about the dinner. I didn't give you or Aunt Sarah any heads up that my parents were coming." I'm sorry about that. There was a pause, then Uncle Matt spoke softly. I won't lie, it was a bit of a shock to see them, but you don't owe us an apology, Claire. It's your life, and you handled things the way you needed to. Your aunt and I were just there to support you. I felt a wave of relief hearing that. Thank you. I wasn't sure how to handle it, honestly. I thought I'd feel better after confronting them, but now I'm not so sure. It's understandable, he replied. Facing the people who hurt you is never easy, but remember, you've built a life for yourself and a family. Don't let them make you question that. We talked for a while longer, and by the end of the call, I felt more at peace. Uncle Matt's words reminded me that I had every right to stand up for myself. They had been my rock for so many years, and their support was something I'd always be grateful for. That night, after I put my son to bed, Jess called. She sounded hesitant, as if she wasn't sure how to start the conversation. I quote, "We've been thinking about what happened at dinner," she said slowly. "I wanted to check in with you and see how you're doing." I quote, "All right, I think," I told her, though my voice lacked conviction. "I just keep replaying everything in my head." "I don't want to make you feel worse," she began, "but I think maybe it's time to consider whether you really needed to do it that way. I mean, I get why you're angry, Claire, but throwing it all in their faces like that? What was the point?" Her words stung, but I knew she wasn't trying to be cruel. Jess had always been the diplomatic one, trying to keep the peace even when things fell apart. "I wanted them to know that I don't need them," I explained, frustration creeping into my voice. "They abandoned me, Jess. For years they acted like I didn't exist. And when they finally decide to show up, it's like nothing ever happened. They didn't even apologize." Jessica was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know they messed up. I know they hurt you, but confronting them like that, humiliating them, I don't know. It just feels like it's keeping the cycle of pain going. You deserved an apology, but now I don't think you'll ever get one." I let her words sink in. She was right in a way. Maybe I had gone too far. But after all those years of being treated like I was invisible, like I didn't matter, I had wanted them to see how wrong they were. I had wanted them to feel the hurt they caused me, even if only for a moment. "I didn't mean to humiliate them," I said softly, realizing that part of me hadn't fully thought through the consequences. "I just wanted them to understand what they did. Jess sighed. "I get it, I do. But now they've shut down completely. Mom hasn't stopped crying since that night, and Dad's furious. They think you don't want anything to do with them. Do I?" I asked quietly, not sure of the answer myself. "I don't know," Jess replied honestly. "Only you can decide that. But I think maybe you should give it some thought before making any big decisions. The call ended, leaving me with even more questions than answers. I couldn't deny that Jess had a point. My parents were never going to apologize if I kept pushing them away. But could I ever forgive them, even if they did? Could I rebuild a relationship with people who had abandoned me when I needed them the most? The next few days passed uneventfully. My parents didn't try to contact me, and I didn't reach out to them either. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Maybe for them to finally apologize, maybe for the weight in my chest to lift. But none of that happened. Instead, I focused on my little family, pouring my energy into my son and Nick, trying to find peace in the life I had built for myself. Then one afternoon, everything shifted. I was feeding my son when I received a message from my mom. It was simple, direct, and nothing like what I expected. "Claire, we are sorry for everything. We know we hurt you, and we don't expect you to forgive us. But please know that we regret what we did. If you don't want us in your life, we understand. We just needed you to know we're sorry." I stared at the screen, reading and rereading the message. For the first time in 10 years, they had apologized. It wasn't a grand, sweeping apology, but it was something. A part of me wanted to respond immediately, to let them know that I had been waiting for this moment for years. But another part of me, one that still held on to the anger and hurt, wasn't sure if it was enough. I showed the message to Nick that evening. He read it, then looked at me with a mix of sympathy and understanding. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I've been wanting an apology for so long, but now that I have it, I'm not sure what to do with it. You don't have to decide right away," Nick said gently. "You've been through a lot because of them. Take your time. Whatever you choose, it's up to you. For the next few days, I didn't respond to the message. I kept replaying everything that had happened. My childhood, the abandonment, the years of silence, and then the dinner. I knew I had been right to confront them, but maybe Jess was right too. Maybe it wasn't about humiliating them or making them feel small. It was about moving forward, whether that meant rebuilding a relationship or letting them go for good. Finally, after days of thinking, I sent my reply. I appreciate the apology. I'm not sure if I'm ready to let you back into my life, but I'll think about it. I need more time. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't total rejection either. It was the truth. I needed time to figure out what I wanted and what role, if any, my parents would have in my life going forward. I didn't know where things would go from here, but for the first time, I felt like I was finally taking control of my own story. It's been a couple of weeks since I sent that reply to my parents. I hadn't heard back from them right away, and that was fine with me. It wasn't like I was expecting things to go back to normal overnight, or even at all. I just wanted to make sure I was setting the terms this time. I wasn't that scared, abandoned kid anymore, and I wasn't going to let them dictate how things moved forward. In the meantime, life went on. My days were filled with taking care of my son, spending time with Nick, and catching up with Jess whenever she had time to visit. I tried to focus on the present, on the family I had built, instead of the lingering shadows of the past. But no matter how much I pushed it away, the question of what to do about my parents kept circling in my mind. A week after my message, my phone buzzed. It was another message from my mom. I took a deep breath before opening it. Clear, we understand. We don't want to push you. We're just grateful that you're willing to think about it. If you ever want to talk, we're here. That was it. No pressure, no guilt, just a simple acknowledgement of where things stood. It wasn't much, but in some strange way, it felt like progress. They weren't asking for more than I was ready to give. Maybe after all these years, they were finally learning. I showed the message to Jess the next time she came over. She read it and smiled a little. I think they're trying, she said softly. Maybe, I replied. But I'm still not sure if I'm ready to forgive them. Jesus nodded. That's fair. It's not like they can undo what they did. It's your call, Claire. You don't owe them anything. That was something I needed to hear. For so long, I had felt like I was the one who had to bend, to make amends, even though I wasn't the one who had broken things. But now, for the first time, I realized that it was okay to put myself first. My parents might want to reconnect, but I didn't have to rush into anything. I had the power to decide what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted with them. As the days passed, I began to think more deeply about what Jess said. I didn't owe my parents forgiveness, but at the same time, I wasn't sure if holding on to the anger was doing me any good. The confrontation at the dinner had felt like the release of years of pent-up hurt. But now that it was out in the open, I wondered if it was time to let go of some of that weight. Nick and I had talked about it a lot over the past few days. He was always supportive, but he had a way of grounding me, making sure I didn't get lost in my own head. What are you most afraid of? He asked one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. I thought about it for a moment. I think I'm afraid that if I let them back in, they'll hurt me again. Like maybe they haven't really changed, and all of this will just open old wounds. Nick nodded. That's valid, but if they've really changed, maybe it could be different this time. The question is, are you willing to give them a chance to prove it? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I leaned back and stared at the sky, letting his words sink in. Was I willing to give them that chance? I had built a life without them, a good life, but I couldn't deny that part of me still craved that connection, the one thing I never had growing up, a real family, one that included my parents. The next day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to throw open the doors and welcome them back into my life with open arms, but I also wasn't going to shut them out completely. I wanted to test the waters and see if there was any real change in them, but it would be on my terms, slowly, and with clear boundaries. I called Jess to talk it through with her. I think I'm ready to meet them again, I told her, my voice steady but unsure. But not at my house this time. I want to meet them somewhere neutral, just to see how things go. Jesus sounded relieved. I think that's a good idea. I'll be there with you if you want. I quote, appreciate that. I said, grateful for her support. "I don't think I could handle this without you." A week later, we set a date. Jess arranged everything, finding a quiet cafe in the middle of town where we could meet for lunch. I was nervous, but I felt ready. This time, it wasn't about confronting the past. It was about seeing if the future could be different. The day of the meeting, I dressed casually, not wanting to make a big deal out of it. Nick stayed home with our son, giving me a kiss on the cheek and telling me that no matter what happened, he was proud of me for even taking this step. When Jess and I arrived at the cafe, my parents were already there, sitting at a table by the window. My heart pounded in my chest as we walked over, but I kept my face calm, my emotions in check. This was my moment of control, and I wasn't going to let fear take over. We sat down, and for a moment no one spoke. My mom looked nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she held her coffee cup. My dad was more composed, but I could see the tension in his posture and the tight set of his jaw. Finally, my mom broke the silence. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "I came because I want to see if we can move forward. But I need you to understand that things can't just go back to how they were. If we're going to have any kind of relationship, it's going to be on my terms, . My dad leaned forward slightly, his face serious. "We understand, and we're sorry, Claire, truly. We know we can't undo what we did, but we want to try and make things right, if you'll let us." I appreciated the honesty, but I wasn't ready to fully trust them yet. "I'm willing to try," I said, "but it's going to take time." They both nodded, and for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could start healing. We talked for a little while longer, mostly about surface-level things, my life with Nick, their lives over the past decade, but the weight of the past still hung over us. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't impossible either. By the time we left the cafe, I felt lighter, like a small part of the burden I'd been carrying for so long had finally been lifted. As Jess and I walked back to the car, she smiled at me. "I'm proud of you, Claire. I know that wasn't easy." I smiled back, feeling a strange sense of peace for the first time in years. "Thanks. I don't know where this is going, but I think it's a start. And it was. It wasn't a perfect reunion, and I wasn't sure if things would ever be truly repaired between us. But for the first time, I was open to the possibility of something new, something better. It wasn't about forgiving and forgetting. It was about learning to live with the past and deciding how to move forward. As I headed home to Nick and our son, I realized that the family I had built, the love I had around me, was more than enough. My parents might never fully understand the pain they caused me, but I didn't need them to. I had my own life now, and for the first time I was truly in control of my own story. Story 2. Mom wants me to divide the money I have for education. The father abandoned me and my step-siblings, or she would expel me. So allow me to explain everything. I am a 17-year-old girl who comes from a mixed-race family. That isn't sufficiently combined to blend well. Although they dated for about 5 years before to getting married, my mom, 43, who is still very much in her youth, married my stepdad almost 3 years ago. Rather than marking the beginning of a new chapter, the ceremony felt more like a box to be checked. To put it mildly, that wasn't the perfect way to end a life. Others may anticipate. Let's talk about my step-siblings now. Emma is 2 years my younger, and Jackson is a year older than me. Despite going to the same high school, our social circles do not cross paths. We appear to be in separate orbits inside the same solar system. Near, yet not in contact. Let's go back to the backstory before delving further into the present. My father and mother were never wed. Dad passed away when I was a little child. I was too little to truly recall him. From the pieces I've put together, he was a renegade who had a strong affection for my mother. His family is the life of the party. Her free nature did not sit well with them. For him, their future was predetermined, and that photo did not include my mother. When Dad was told he had leukemia, his health completely collapsed. When they discovered it, it was already in its latter phases. The countdown began abruptly when he was just 27. The positive aspect? Before he died, he was able to establish an education fund for me. That money became my lucky charm, a guarantee of future security that my mother vowed I could use only when the moment arrived. Let's fast forward to when I was 8 years old and introduce my stepfather. Shortly after we changed towns, he appeared. My mother made this choice because she couldn't bear to stay at the location where she and her father first met. Jackson and Emma accompanied him, each bearing the scars of a mother who abandoned them after their divorce in order to pursue a new romantic endeavor. You know, my stepdad was left to pick up the pieces of my hopes. The thought of suddenly having a larger family sounded like winning the lottery to any child. A brother, a sister, and a new father. It seemed like the ideal setting for those Christmas card pictures and family movie evenings. But soon enough, reality set in. The atmosphere of the entire family. It never made sense. Our shared residence did not establish us as family. We were more like two roommates who were married and happened to have some DNA in common. Please understand that they weren't cruel or anything. Over dinner, there was no overt turmoil or yelling bouts. Something more subtle, like a persistent hum that's impossible to identify yet impossible to ignore. The fact that the vibe was so off didn't help either. My stepfather and his children. I just wasn't a part of their connection. I made an effort. Believe me, I tried to be involved to create some sort of connection, but each time it felt like tossing a pebble into a frozen lake and praying it wouldn't simply skid and land without doing anything. But Mom, she was another matter. They hugged her and showed her affection in ways that made me envious. I wondered whether it was because in their minds she took the position of their mother and ex-wife, who was more of a gold digger than a caregiver, according to the town's rumors. I felt like a visitor in my own life after the entire setup. Misplaced comma not abused. Similar to a puzzle piece taken from another box. As I grew up, I couldn't get rid of the sense that I was the odd one out. It seems as though I received the incorrect edition of the family manual, while everyone else received the correct one. I never really discussed it in spite of all of this. What might be said, that I was excluded? That before I arrived, they appeared to be a family and would remain such whether or not I was around? Even I heard it sound petty. These emotions didn't really go away as I grew older, but I became more adept at handling them. Perhaps it was all in my brain, I thought. Perhaps I was simply the introspective sort who made a big deal out of nothing. However, I felt in my heart that I was lacking something essential, a sense of community and belonging. My room turned to become a haven for me. It was the only location where I could block out the commotion and the continual reminder that I was a member of an existing group. I put myself into my schoolwork and college preparations as high school progressed. That enjoyable? My father departed. Money was no longer the only factor. It turned become my escape route. My want for a new beginning where I may define family whatever I saw fit. This continued until my mother decided to drop a bomb one evening on a typical Tuesday. No, just a hefty one, not the dramatic sort. After supper, we were tidying up. When she stated we needed to talk, my thoughts were drowned out by the hum of the dishwasher. That was her tone. It was stirring, the one that represented something significant. Something that could upset my well-thought-out plans. She began by expressing her pride in my impending graduation and how I had developed into a person she looked up to. Remarks that would have thrilled me in any other situation. However, they seemed like a lead into something more difficult that evening. And I was correct. She required me to support my family because my stepfather had not been able to save money for his children's college education. I also let my step-siblings to spend the funds for my education fund. At the same time that I was starting college, Jackson had taken a year off. That then was the main topic of discussion. My father had explicitly specified in his will that only I would have the authority to decide how I spent my money once I became 18. So legally, my mother couldn't control the money. To be honest, I also didn't want to give my step-siblings any of the money. First of all, neither they nor I'm sure, thought of them as family. Second, I would like to use the whole amount that my father had set aside for me, even if I don't wind up utilizing it all. Until I started working when he was going to support me, that type of money might really help me get a jump start and be helpful when I have my own place and other things. Since I attended a public school rather than a private one, and my mother didn't have to pay for my education, I had already saved a significant amount of money thus far. In addition to becoming an excellent student, I hoped to receive a scholarship from the college where I chose to apply and attend. I had never been concerned about money. However, as I grew older and approached my 18th birthday in a few months, I began to consider earning money and saving money. Therefore, it didn't seem like a good idea to give my step-siblings my money. I thus informed my mother that I did not believe it was essential to share those cash with them. If attending college was truly Jackson's goal, he could just take out a college loan like millions of children do. I didn't even dispute with my mother's criticism of my response, which was that I was being selfish. In fact, I was being selfish, but I didn't think it was bad. I simply informed her that I was being selfish and that it was okay since I didn't take into account my step-siblings or relatives instead of battling with her. My mother began yelling at me at that point because, presumably, she thought what I had said was at least a crime. Because I had told her the truth and that I didn't consider my step-siblings to be family, it took me a few moments to really comprehend that she was going insane. On the one hand, the family had been treating me like an outsider for the previous 8 years, and she had never appeared to notice it, so the double standards were absurd. Perhaps she simply didn't care and didn't notice. However, for no apparent reason, I had to regard them like family and treat them as such. I made an effort to talk to her in a calm manner without yelling in her face. But it was useless since she was already criticizing me and calling me names like ungrateful. I told her that she could scream at me all she wanted, but I wasn't going to alter my decision, so I waited for her to stop screaming at me. Screaming at me would just serve to further distance us from one another and decrease my willingness to assist them in any way. After I stated that, my mother became a bit more composed, and I believed that I would finally be able to express my emotions, and that we would have a logical conversation thereafter. But I was stupid for it. I had forgotten that my sentiments were completely irrelevant in that environment. The happiness of my mother, my stepfather, and my step-siblings was all that counted. None of them cared much about my pleasure. Once my mother had cooled down, she threatened to throw me out of the house if I didn't make up my mind within a week. It was so absurd that I assumed she was kidding. She informed me, however, that she wasn't. Furthermore, she would soon no longer be legally required to allow me to remain with them, as I would no longer be a child, since my birthday was approaching in less than a month. Therefore, if I didn't agree to divide the college fund that my father had set up especially for me with my step-siblings, I would be living away from home and all alone. It was hard for me to comprehend that my own mother would say anything like that and place me in such a challenging situation. She advised me to go cautiously and carefully consider my options, because this choice may cost me everything, even if I was meant to be her own flesh and blood for the sake of my step-siblings. I sat there trying to take in what she had just said before she exited the room. Being treated that way by my own mother was really offensive. And on that day, I decided that I would leave this place at any costs. Since I was going to move out for my 18th birthday, I started chatting to my pals and then informed them that I needed assistance finding a place of my own. I informed them of everything my mother had said and made sure they understood how urgent the issue was. I was aware that I would receive all of the money when I reached 18 and would then have discretion over how I spent it. Yes, I would have to carefully consider my college major and stay to a budget. But it was worth it since it meant that I would finally be able to live independently and not have to put up with my family, or rather, make them put up with me. Because it was more obvious than ever after that talk with my mother that I had no place in that house. Furthermore, I was genuinely an afterthought. I hadn't been overanalyzing anything for all these years. Since I truly had not anticipated this, I may have even been overanalyzing the situation. A friend of mine informed me a few days ago that because we were interested in the same subject, she had been able to talk to a relative who was applying to the same universities as me. She wanted to be independent from the start, therefore she intended to live in an apartment. Additionally, my friend recommended that I contact her. Therefore, we could get an apartment together and live there if we wind up attending the same college. I thought it was a terrific idea and almost immediately contacted my friend's cousin. We sorted things out, and I informed him about my predicament as well. She seemed to be very kind, and I could tell she was a kind person with whom I would get along. Thus that aspect was resolved. And until college started, my sole concern was where I was going to live. My friends assured me that I could live with them till college, so it was very easy for me to sort that one out, even if there were still a few months left until then, begun at last. Anything would be preferable to living with my mother and these people. So even though it was a dirty and dangerous plan, I was prepared to follow through. Because of the terrible treatment I received following my argument with my mother. And by awful, I don't mean that they were hurting me or saying hurtful things to me, but what they were doing was far more degrading. They had banded together and were behaving as though I were the most repulsive thing ever. For example, everyone would immediately stop chatting and return to their rooms if I walked in. They would constantly give me the side look and avoid talking to me as if I had done something wrong. I wanted to flee because it felt so awful and it was embarrassing. I decided that I would leave this area as soon as my friends were prepared to take me in, but it required some time to make arrangements for myself. I thus made the decision to tell my mother the truth and walk away the day she talked to me once more to inquire whether I had changed my mind. I informed her that in actuality I had not altered my mind and that I would be leaving this area. I informed her that I could no longer tolerate the insane treatment I had received from her and her family during the previous week. I informed her that I had already had conversations with a few friends and that I would be living with them until I was able to leave this place and cease attending college. I told her that I didn't want to see her ever again, so she could throw me out and I wouldn't care. Since I had a plan in place, I wasn't shocked when my mother began berating me again and telling me to leave her house because ungrateful, self-centered brats like me had no place here. I was delighted to see them go, and I left with a good feeling. However, it was not the end of my strategy. I had been pondering methods to avenge my mother during the time I had been spending alone in my room. From the moment she married my stepfather, my life had transformed, and not in a positive manner. She was content with her new family though, so she didn't even appear to mind. I had made an effort to hide my emotions and be pleased for her, but it was now clear that she didn't care about me at all, and that her stepchildren came before me. I felt like a complete mess because of the way she had been treating me, and I had decided that I would not leave this unanswered. I thus made the decision to tell everyone about her as soon as I left the house, revealing her true nature to the world. Nobody in their right mind would ever support the things she had said to me, which is the only reason I had waited a week to leave her house and then talk about her absurd demands. I didn't want her to have any access to me, let alone express her disappointment in me or anything else. And I was aware that after moving in with a friend, I made the decision to write a piece about my mother on the internet. I put up what had happened and how my mother had been yelling at me for not wanting to help with my step-siblings' education fund. I added that I had never been treated like family by any of them, but my mother never seemed to mind. Only when I did the same thing to them did it become an issue. I discussed the disparity in treatment. I added that she had essentially forgotten about me after she moved in with her new family, and I said that I thought she was the most self-centered person on the planet because of the way she had been acting toward me simply for refusing something so absurd, which any reasonable person in my situation would have refused. I didn't believe it was fair to demand that I share the money she was discussing with individuals who never made me feel like a member of their family because my father had explicitly given it to me and it wasn't for anyone else to spend. If my step-siblings had ever been kind to me, I might have even given it some thought, but that wasn't the case in this instance. I wrote that one post to vent my fury, which was pretty high, since many people, including my father's friends and their children, followed me. I was aware that this had a detrimental effect on my mother. I simply didn't care at the moment, and I wanted to get revenge on her. Since I only had one parent to rely on and my grandparents weren't really involved with me, she had in fact been my only source of happiness and support throughout my childhood. Her preference for my step-siblings over me seemed like a major betrayal because she had been my first and most significant friend. I didn't care about the repercussions. I just wanted to get it all out of my system since I was so wounded. Therefore, I produced the post, and it turned out precisely as I had anticipated. My mother sent me many texts claiming that I had destroyed her life because the post had been viewed by everyone and shared countless times. Among her friends, my mother had a good deal of popularity. The fact that people were only seeking a reason to spread rumors about her was not shocking, and I had given them exactly what they wanted. She had called me several times, but I never picked up the phone or replied to her texts. I had thought that writing that piece would help me feel less depressed, since I was just miserable. However, my mother's subsequent comments simply made me feel worse about my choice. Her text made it clear to me that she was really conflicted about this. "I never expected me to do something like this," she remarked, adding that she thought she had brought me up to be sympathetic and caring. She couldn't even believe that I was her daughter anymore, since I was the complete antithesis of each of those things. She then brought out the heavy guns, telling me that if my father had been here today, he would have seen this spiteful and evil side of me. He wouldn't even want to be related to me and would be really dissatisfied. I felt like I was doing something terrible, and that really got to me. I began to reconsider everything, which is what ultimately led me to this point. I'm not even sure whether it was the correct thing for me to keep my money from my step-siblings at this time. Since I'm not even sure if I can handle them anymore. I'm not sure whether I should make amends with my mother and the others, following my actions. However, this may also be a highly cunning attempt to control me, and it's unquestionably effective if it is. I need your aid because of this, because I can finally make a decision now that everyone is aware of the facts. I am also the jerk for posting against my mother after refusing to give my step-siblings any of my education funds. Hello, so much for the reaction to start. Many of you gave me heartfelt words which helped me feel better about who I am and what I have accomplished. To see things as they really are, I suppose I need that. Just because I wanted to see the positive aspects of my mother and think she wasn't a horrible person, I was going to give her another opportunity. However, what sort of mother would talk and act in such a way? She simply isn't a decent person. Instead of fighting it, it's time for me to embrace it. To ensure she couldn't get in touch with me again, I blocked her. I was aware that she would merely text me again to control me or to remove that post. I have no desire to remove that post. I'd like it to remain up, until she apologizes to me anyhow. My friend's mother informed her that I was living with them, so she is aware of my whereabouts and can get in touch with me. Even though I am aware of this, I will interpret her failure to contact me as evidence that she is more concerned with maintaining her own reputation than with me. I walked out of my stepfather's house 2 weeks ago and have been staying with my buddy ever since. I had virtually no communication with any of my family members after that post. Emily gave me a pretty horrible look and acted like I wasn't even there, even though I did run into her a few times when I was at school. Given that they are essentially experts at acting as though I don't exist, it is not unexpected. For the last 8 years, they have been doing this. Now it must have been easy for them. In any case, this night my mother finally paid me a visit. She brought a black plastic bag, which is often used for trash, and threw it in the living room, claiming it contained all of my leftover belongings. Basically, whatever I managed to fit in my duffel bag before I left my place. The fact that she packed my belongings in a trash bag was a bit offensive, but it was far more offensive when she threw everything on the living room floor, forcing me to gather with my friend and her parents, who were horrified by what she had done. They actually took it upon themselves to debate with my mother about her behavior, since they did not approve of it at all. They advised her that instead of treating me so badly, she ought to show me more empathy because I was her only daughter. She wasn't amenable to their harsh reprimands. She informed them that since they were the ones who were housing a delinquent like me, they had no right to discuss her parents' methods. I was by no means a delinquent, so when she said that, I nearly started laughing. She had been aware that I was actually a scholar student. I didn't have to, but I nearly brought it up myself. My buddy, who defended me, reprimanded my mother and expressed gratitude that her parents had a heart and were not like my mother. After it became kind of a cat fight, my mother became quite irate and walked out. I felt a great sense of gratitude for my buddy and her parents. They stood up for me even though I don't think it was really necessary, and I'm so grateful that they did. It was quite moving since this is probably the first time in my life that I have had someone stand up for me. However, I don't believe my mother will be returning anytime soon, since I wouldn't dare return here after the greeting she had yesterday. And because I'm tired of the drama already, I sincerely hope she doesn't come up. I want to start a new chapter in my life and move on. But if she continues to show up, I can't do that. Therefore, I pray and hope that this is the last time I see her. Hello everyone, it's been a while since we last saw one another. For a long time now, I have not been active. I believe a few months. However, you can't hold me responsible. The reason for this was that I was applying to universities in an effort to get into a reputable one with the scholarship. I put forth a lot of effort and it paid off. I'm now attending the school of my choosing. Yes, I am following the plan that I came up with a few months ago. We will live together after my friend's cousin, who is applying to the same universities, was accepted here as well. She is a very kind girl. And the icing on the cake is that she is my friend's cousin, because I can stay in contact with everyone in this way. I've had a really tough emotional few of months, but my friends have been there to support me. And I can't express how grateful I am to have these individuals in my life. Many people I know have awful parents, and their families turn to their friends for emotional support. But thus far, I've made an effort to stay away from it. But I feel like my buddies are my family now that I know how far they will go for me. I will always be appreciative of all that individuals have done for me. Sincerely, I doubt I could have progressed this far without the assistance of everyone, and that includes everyone here who messaged me and offered such encouraging words to get me through this. The fact that my own mother hasn't even bothered to text me since I moved out is absolutely hilarious and odd. Even though I had unlocked her and she was able to communicate with me, she didn't seem to mind. She doesn't care about me at all. However, you people are. My friends encouraged me to believe that I was capable of succeeding. The fact that small strangers on the internet helped me more than my mother did is adorable. However, it is all behind us now. I am quite thrilled for what lies ahead and am looking forward to starting over here. Hello everyone. This is I never imagined that I would return with another post so quickly. However, life has a way of presenting you with unforeseen challenges. After I moved out and started college, I think I assumed that the turmoil from my family was over. However, it appears that I was mistaken. To be honest, I'm really tired and things have grown much more complex than I ever imagined. My stepdad unexpectedly sent me a mail a few weeks ago. Yes, the same stepfather who, while I lived with them, hardly acknowledged my presence. He apologized for the way things had turned out and said he wanted to meet up to chat in this lengthy, meandering text. I wasn't sure what to think at first. Why was he just now, after all this time, reaching out? I wanted to ignore him, part of me. But I also had an inquisitive side. Perhaps he was saying something significant. I reasoned, why not? I agreed to meet him when I arrived at a cafe close to my school. It felt weird all around. He was anxious as he sat down, and I could tell that this would not be a typical talk. He rambled on for a while before getting to the subject. He said that he was unaware that my mother would expel me due to the college fund. He claimed that she had made that choice without even talking to him, and they got into a heated argument when she later told him. When he told me this, he appeared very distressed, stating that since I left, things had been quite tight at home. My mom has apparently been pressuring him to increase his financial contributions, despite the fact that he is still working to get out of the financial quagmire that his ex-wife left him in. He admitted that ever since I moved out, he has been doubting their whole relationship and is even thinking about filing for divorce. It was a lot to process. It was sort of odd to hear that their marriage is in trouble due of what happened to me, even though I never gave it any attention. I wasn't quite sure how to react. It seemed like he was actually having trouble, so I felt sorry for him. However, there was another aspect of me that was simply numb. I informed him that although I was grateful for the apology, my mother's treatment of me was still terrible. He indicated that he understood by nodding. He then asked whether I would be open to speaking with my mother once again in order to assist him resolve their differences. I had to draw the line there. I made it clear to him that I had no interest in mediating their conflict. I don't want to be sucked into their turmoil again. I have my own life to think about. After I stated that, he seemed somewhat dejected. I assumed that was the end of it when he thanked me for our meeting and walked away. However, I received another communication a few days later, this time from my mother. Curiosity overcame me, and I nearly didn't open it. She claimed she wanted to speak with me after hearing about my conversation with my stepdad. I didn't reply at first, but she kept contacting me to apologize and claim she missed me. She even attempted to guilt-trip me by claiming that my refusal to assist was destroying the family. Since then, it has been an emotional roller coaster. I thought the worst thing would be cutting them off, but it's more worse when they try to reintegrate. I have yet to reply to my mother, and I'm not sure whether I want to. Now that things aren't going so well for her and my stepdad, I can't help but wonder if she's simply attempting to control me once more. I just learned from some common acquaintances that Jackson and Emma have been telling people at school that I'm the reason their dad could leave their mom, which further complicates matters. It quote "s terrible" that they're essentially portraying me as the bad guy in this whole thing. Some of our common acquaintances have been giving me strange glances, and a few of them have even unfollowed me on social media. It's like the drama of high school again. However, it's now affecting my time at college as well. If that wasn't enough, it seems like my mother has been telling others that I'm ungrateful and that I left the family for a pointless reason. She is actively playing the victim, and it seems to be working since several of her friends and even some members of our extended family have been contacting me to suggest that we make amends. They're saying stuff like, "You only get one mother, and family is the most important thing." But when I was being treated like an alien in my own house, where was that sense of familial loyalty? It's hypocritical too. The sense of loneliness has been one of the most difficult aspects of all of this. Even though my roommate has been fantastic, and I'm surrounded by new acquaintances at college, I still feel really alone. I always believed that things would miraculously improve once I left that poisonous atmosphere. However, I'm now aware that it will take a lot longer for the wounds from that period to heal. It has been incredibly beneficial for me to go through all of this with the support of an on-campus therapist. She is assisting me in realizing that I don't owe my family anything simply because we are connected, and that it's acceptable to establish boundaries with them. I was brought up to think that family always comes first, no matter what, so it has been a difficult pill to take. However, I can't continue to put my own health at risk for others who don't genuinely care about me. In the meantime, my mom and stepdad's relationship seems to be deteriorating. Last week, my stepdad contacted me once again to let me know that he was moving out and was looking for a house of his own. He said that he needed some space to sort things out since he could no longer stand the incessant fighting. I told him I wasn't sure whether I wanted to keep in contact when he asked. I don't want to become overly interested in their issues since I'm still digesting things. It's strange since I didn't think of him as a member of my family for a long time. However, now that he's contacting me, I'm beginning to realize that perhaps he's not as horrible as I once believed. I quote, "Am still cautious about coming too near though." Last weekend, my mother arrived on school, which further exacerbated the pandemonium. It was completely unexpected. She wanted to visit me while she was in town, so she texted me. She somehow found out where I lived even though I didn't answer. When she arrived at my dorm, my roommate allowed her in, assuming it was simply another parent visit. I almost cried as I entered the room and found her seated on my bed. She pretended to be kind at first, claiming she wanted to sort things out and that she missed me. But she lost it the moment I told her I wasn't interested. She became irate, accusing me of being ungrateful and self-centered, and of destroying the family. She even made another attempt to bring up my father, claiming that he would be embarrassed by my behavior. It was unbelievable to me that she was guilt-tripping me by exploiting my dad. She refused to leave even after I ordered her to. She would not stop talking about how I was destroying the family. To make matters worse, my roommate finally intervened and urged her to leave. She was also reprimanded by my mother, who said she had no right to interfere in our family affairs. She had to be escorted away by university security because things became that nasty. It was quite embarrassing. Furthermore, my roommate now knows far more about the conflict in my family than I ever intended. I've been trying to hide ever since. My mom hasn't been in touch with me since that day, but I'm sure she will try to get in touch with me eventually. With all of this, I'm really at my breaking point. All I want to do is get on with my life and concentrate on the future. However, it seems like every time I make an effort, something else drags me back into the chaos I created. It quote, "S so difficult when the people who are meant to care about you are the ones inflicting all of your anguish. Even though I know I need to keep my distance and concentrate on myself, I'm making an effort to be resilient and keep in mind that I'm worthy of better treatment than what they've given me. but maintaining that viewpoint might be difficult on other days. In any case, I appreciate your patience with me over this entire ordeal. It helps a little to put everything in writing, even in the event that nothing is fixed. I'm simply going to keep moving forward and hope that things will improve soon, even though I have no idea what the future contains. For now, I'm just trying to get by each day as it comes, but I'll keep you all informed if anything more occurs. Story 3. I divorced my wife because she had an offensive tattoo for her AP. This is how the whole thing began. I will be honest with you all. Of all things, I didn't imagine a tattoo would lead my marriage to fail. However, here we are. Molly and I. 5 years have passed since we started dating. Married for 3 years. You know, I felt like everything was going well. Like any marriage, we argued, but nothing out of the ordinary. But now that I'm looking back, I can see how everything began to fall apart. Everything began when we got engaged. It's okay that Molly has always enjoyed getting tattoos. I have no animosity toward them or those who obtain them. Simply put, I didn't want one, as if I'm not into it. In any case, she approached me with excitement at our engagement party and said, "Baby, wouldn't it be awesome if we got matching tattoos to celebrate?" At first, I assumed she wasn't serious and kind of laughed it off. She was dead serious, though. "Look, I don't mind if you get a tattoo," I informed her. Simply said, "I have no desire to get one for myself." She didn't make a big deal out of it at the time, but she did look a bit sad. That seemed to be the end of it. Yes, she may occasionally bring it up, but we're grown-ups, right? I'll do my thing, and she can do hers. A few months after the wedding, we tie the knot. When she asks me about matching tattoos, she brings it up once again. I kind of tell her that I've already said no at this point, assuming she'll just leave it. But no. She would mention it like clockwork every couple of months. It seemed to get more dramatic each time, as if she was growing increasingly irate that I didn't agree with the entire tattoo idea. To be honest, I was starting to find it rather bothersome. Every time I said the same thing to her, "I don't want a tattoo, but you can get one if you want. Easy, isn't it?" Apparently not. I didn't understand why she started acting as like this was a relationship deal breaker or something. Go ahead a little. Molly receives a promotion at work. I was rather pleased with her for that. She earned it by working hard. She started talking about this one coworker of hers after being moved to a different office and team. Josh. She claimed that Josh was this really great man with all these tattoos, and it seemed like he was advising her on the type of ink to purchase. The fact that she was conversing with a man at work didn't bother me either. She was always bringing him up, and I'm not that insecure or anything. Yes, I became bothered by it. As if she were always discussing Josh and his tattoos. Since I didn't want to be that man, I initially remained silent. You know, the one who becomes really suspicious just because his wife is having a conversation with another man. But I secretly thought, there's something wrong. Then one evening, Molly makes a remark that really took me by surprise. She said, "Josh believes you're not a real man because you're afraid to get a tattoo, while we were simply relaxing." What am I sitting there thinking? What on earth was the source of that? I have repeatedly assured her that I have no fear of getting inked. I simply do not desire one. Isn't there a difference? I then questioned her. "You would shove that in my face, but why?" "To be honest, it seems like Josh is attempting to get inside your trousers. Get this too, she simply leaves, if the shoe is appropriate." I was taken aback. Even so, what does that mean? Did she agree with him, for example? She truly believes that since I refuse to get a random tattoo, I'm not a true guy. I simply couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand her sudden cruelty because we'd never had problems like this before. I simply sat there pondering as she slammed the door after storming off to the bedroom. Is this a genuine thing? I wasn't sure if it was just the tattoo or if there was something else going on, but it felt like things were rapidly becoming worse. The days that followed were quite uncomfortable. Molly didn't speak to me. There was this strange tension between us, even though we were hardly in the same room. She seemed upset with me. However, for what purpose? As I had no desire for a tattoo. That was simply nonsensical. She then informed me that she was going shopping after work a few days later. Not a huge deal. That's what she always done. However, she seemed as though she was waiting for me to ask her what was going on when she got home. She just grinned and rolled up her sleeve to reveal this brand new tattoo on her forearm when I inquired how her shopping experience had gone. Let me tell you, I didn't anticipate it. 2 Chinese symbols were present. They symbolized freedom and strength, she informed me. Listen, even if I don't understand Chinese, I could tell something wasn't right. Molly is white. She speaks no Chinese at all. I'm already thinking that this whole situation is a little strange. However, the initials beneath the JWT symbols were what truly caught my attention. What did the initials stand for? I asked her, glancing at her. She stopped at that point. Have you ever had the sensation that someone is going to say something that would make you angry? Yes, I was that person. They're Josh's initials, she murmured after inhaling deeply. At first, I wasn't even sure how to react. You had the initials of another person tattooed on your arm, I thought as I sat there. Dot? Really? It was made worse by her explanation, if it is feasible at all. She said that Josh had escorted her to his tattoo artist and that he supported her during the entire process. She thus wished to add his initials in recognition of their relationship. As in, what the devil? She basically spun it on me like I was the bad person, even though I told her straight out that having another guy's initials tattooed on her body was disrespectful and that she should have it taken off. I was the one who told her she could get a tattoo if she wanted one, and she claimed I was attempting to control her. She even made fun of me for not getting matching tattoos with her. Instead, she told Josh about the encounter. I realized then that we were in serious jeopardy. She was behaving as though I was at fault for being angry, which I found unbelievable. How could she fail to recognize that her actions were so disrespectful? Over the following few days, we seldom spoke. It was always about the tattoo when we did, and each time, as if it were no great issue, she would advise me to go on. But to me, that was a huge issue, a big deal. I had a totally different perspective on Molly after the entire tattoo event. You know, after spending a lot of time with someone, you suddenly discover they're not who you once believed them to be? Yes, I was at that location. It was more than simply the ink on her flesh, even if the tattoo was awful enough. It was her demeanor, the way she pretended that I was insane for being angry. I felt as though I was living with an unfamiliar person. One evening, Molly is on the phone as I sit in the living room watching TV. I can hear her talking and laughing even though she's in the other room. Ordinarily, I wouldn't mind. You mean it's simply a phone call? Then I hear her speak the name of Josh. At this point, my ears instantly pricked up. It just annoyed me to hear her speak to him since I have a lot of worries running through my mind. Even though I couldn't understand all she said, I could see that they were far too at ease with one another. It wasn't a coworker, based on the manner she was laughing at whatever he was saying. I hope you understand. I began to feel as though my stomach was sinking. Although you are unable to pinpoint the exact cause, you are aware when something is amiss. Yes, I question her directly. Why are you talking to Josh so much? When she finally hangs off the phone, she looked at me as if I were the one who was being unreasonable and said, "He's Jake, my friend." What's so important? I was unable to resist. I retaliated. The fact that you're behaving as though he's more than just a buddy is the main issue. For heaven's sake, you have his initials permanently inked on your arm. She went on the defense right away, so it was definitely a bad idea to say that. She said, "You don't understand our friendship. You're insecure, but it doesn't imply I'm acting improperly. Uneasy?" She intended to strike me with it. I wasn't insecure. I couldn't understand. I was attempting to figure out why my wife appeared to be more attached to a random coworker than she was to me. However, you cannot dispute with someone who has already decided that you are the villain. I decided to ignore it. The following several weeks were a haze, at least for the time being. I was seldom speaking to Molly. We didn't feel as though we were actually living together. Rather, we were merely sharing a place, assuming that makes sense. We would hardly exchange words once I got home from work. She was using her phone more and more, and I assumed that half of the time she was messaging Josh. She would always become defensive when I asked her what she was doing. I simply stopped inquiring. But one evening, everything changed. Molly arrived home from work late. That was something she had been doing more of, always with some explanation about going out for drinks with coworkers or staying late. I wouldn't be skeptical of that kind of stuff normally. but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right, especially considering all that had been happening. I could smell her perfume as soon as she stepped through the door. She didn't own it. I was familiar with the scent of her perfume, and it wasn't this. I then said, "Where have you been? I told you I went out with some coworkers," she continued, rolling her eyes at me as if I were being neurotic. "You don't always have to stay up for me. Yes, but your perfume smells like someone else's." I retaliated, which caught her interest. She appeared momentarily taken aback, but she soon recovered. "Oh, that was probably just a farewell embrace from one of the gals. I truly wanted to trust her." However, I had a gut feeling that she wasn't being completely honest. However, I decided to ignore it for the evening since I didn't want to create a major argument. Nevertheless, the skepticism persisted. Things became much stranger a few days later. One morning while Molly was getting ready for work, I saw that she was devoting a lot more attention to her appearance than normal. Now, I'm not suggesting that wanting to look beautiful is strange. However, this was not like the others. She was choosing a lovely clothing, applying cosmetics, and styling her hair, things she wouldn't often do for a living. She seemed to be heading out on a date or something. "Why are you getting all dressed up for work?" I questioned her. "Is it possible for a female to desire to look nice for herself?" she remarked, laughing it off. "Yes, that's reasonable." However, something felt off, but I didn't push it. I was already making connections in the back of my head, but I didn't want to come off as domineering or anything. She arrived home late. The scent, the phone conversations with Josh. All of this was leading to something I was not yet ready to acknowledge. Then the time arrived that proved it all. She informed me one evening that she wouldn't be home till late since she was attending a business function. At first I didn't give it much thought, but later that evening I started to have this uneasy sensation. You know how your instincts tell you that something is off? Yes, that. I so made the decision to take a drive in order to decompress. We used to occasionally visit this tavern, which I see when I'm traveling about. And what do you know? Molly's vehicle is parked in front. It was there even though I wasn't seeking for it. My heart began to race. I was unsure about what to do, so I pulled aside, but I couldn't just ignore it. When I entered, I saw her smiling with Josh seated next to her at a table in the corner. They weren't only seated opposite one another, they were seated adjacent to one another, very near. At first she didn't see me, but when she did, her face became pale as if she had been caught. I didn't create any commotion or anything. I simply approached, gave her a direct look and said, "Is this an event for work?" Molly made no effort to think of an explanation. Josh appeared to want to vanish as she sat there motionless. I didn't even wait for her to answer. I simply turned around and left. I realized it was finished at that point. I could no longer afford to sit around and act as though nothing had happened. She could keep both her friendship with Josh and her tattoo. I had finished. Later that evening, I had already packed my things when she arrived home. I didn't hold off on asking her to clarify. She didn't have to. We were both aware of what was happening, and I had no intention of remaining and continuing to be made fun of. I was finished when I left the bar and noticed Molly and Josh seated there. No more games or justifications. I went home and gathered my belongings. Whether it was late or I had to sleep someplace else that night didn't matter to me. She and I were no longer living in the same home. I didn't want to be in the same room with her, much less look at her. When Molly arrived home at last, she seemed to already be aware of what was going on. Her expression fell as she entered and noticed my baggage beside the entrance. She made no effort to seem astonished. She seemed to be trying to think of the appropriate words as she stood there for a moment, but nothing came out. After a while, she simply said, "Are you leaving?" I answered, "Yeah, I'm leaving," looking her in the eyes. "What were you anticipating?" At first, she remained silent, simply remained there staring at me as if she was waiting for me to calm down and decide otherwise, but I wasn't. I had had enough of being treated like an idiot. "It's not what you think," she added in the end. I lost it at that point. "Oh, really? You've been lying to me for weeks, and now you're not sitting at a pub with the guy you've been crushing on and who you have a tattoo of on your arm. Because I think that's what it is." Although she didn't have a leg to stand on, she appeared to want to protect herself. I wasn't a moron. Even though she hadn't yet come clean about it, I understood what was happening. She made another attempt. We were only conversing. I chuckled. I was unable to resist. Only conversing. And that's what you're going to use then? Whatever her reason was, I didn't care. I'd heard enough. I picked up my stuff and made my way to the door, but she took hold of my arm before I could get away. She had tears in her eyes as I turned around. I thought for a moment I should quit, as if things could yet be salvageable. Then I recalled everything. The phone calls, the late hours, the tattoo, and most importantly, her deceit. "This isn't on me, Molly," I murmured, releasing my arm. "This is what you did. Your decisions were your own." After that, she made no attempt to stop me. I simply left by walking out the door. I didn't turn around. In the end, I spent a few days at a friend's house while I considered my options. Although it wasn't perfect, it allowed me some mental space. When I told my friend Ryan what had happened, he was somewhat taken aback. Molly had appeared to be pleasant and typical each time he had met her. Do you know? However, I suppose that until something like this occurs, you never truly know someone. The following several days passed quickly as I tried to organize my life and dealt with phone calls and texts. Molly made many attempts to get in touch. She apologized and asked if we could chat in the messages she sent me. However, I had no interest in listening to her apologize. What may be discussed? For heaven's sake, she was tattooed with the initials of another person. You cannot just rationalize that away. I wasn't a moron. She attempted to portray this as an innocent friendship, but I knew it wasn't. I didn't want to accept it at first, but I had that instinct from the beginning. I honestly didn't want to hear her justifications or whatever twisted version of the narrative she was trying to sell me, since it was all too obvious now. She arrived at Ryan's house a few days after I left. She must have discovered where I was staying. I didn't anticipate her finding me, but I wasn't exactly hiding either. It was only me when she knocked on the door because Ryan wasn't home. She was standing there in the rain, looking like a mess, and I didn't want to allow her in, so I opened the door for her. I had no intention of making a big disturbance on the street. She plopped down on the couch after coming in drenched. For a long time, neither of us spoke. She had been sobbing, and I could tell, but I refused to believe it. I waited for her to say anything while I sat there. The stillness was finally broken by her. Jake was screwed up by me. I am certain that I did. I remained silent. What might be said? She was already aware of my emotions, but she continued to speak. It never got this far because I never intended it to. I didn't mean to offend you. But you did, I responded, glancing at her. I was wounded by you. You did more than simply injure me. You repeatedly lied to me once you started doing it. She wiped at her tears and nodded. I apologize. I understand. I have no idea why I did that. I was foolish. Now perhaps I would have heeded her advice a few years ago. Perhaps I would have attempted to make amends and forgave her. But I simply couldn't after all of that. I wasn't the same person who could overlook this. Did you sleep with him? I questioned her. It was there. The crucial query, the response to which I already knew, but she had to say it to me. After a moment of hesitation, she nodded. Yes, I did. I didn't feel any better after hearing her acknowledge it. It simply made everything seem more genuine, if anything. Now there was no turning back. That was it. I got up and went to look out the window at the rain. I was at a loss for words. I felt like screaming and shouting at her for betraying me. However, I was too exhausted for it. I simply felt exhausted. You ought to go. At last, I said without even glancing back at her. She didn't dispute. She didn't argue. She just got up, picked up her handbag, and walked out. It was over in an instant. After that, the divorce procedure proceeded fairly quickly. There wasn't anything to argue about because we didn't have children or anything else that bound us together. The home was mine. We both signed the paperwork when she moved in with a buddy. Deal completed. Throughout the entire event, we only talked a few more times, and each time we did, it was courteous, cordial, and even. However, it seemed chilly, like if we were two complete strangers rather than long-term spouses. I was relieved when the divorce was eventually completed. Not joyful, not depressed, simply relieved. I felt as though a burden had been removed from my chest. I was free to stop pretending. I didn't need to constantly question if she was telling the truth or whether something was happening behind my back. It was finished. I never thought my marriage would end this way. However, I suppose life has a way of taking you by surprise. And to be honest, I don't mind at all. I'm prepared to go on. Following the divorce's finalization, I assumed everything would be over. I kind of assumed that we would both go on, part ways, and be done with each other. However, as usual, things don't always go as planned in life. Molly wasn't finished playing tricks on me, however. After everything was resolved, she began sending me sporadic texts a few weeks later. Initially, they were only those kind, pointless texts that said things like, "I hope you're doing okay," or "just checking in." Since there was really nothing else to say, I chose to disregard the majority of them. I didn't need her to check in on me like we were still friends or anything, since we weren't together anymore. Then, one evening, she unexpectedly sent me this lengthy note. It resembled a text wall. She began by discussing how difficult the divorce was for her and how things weren't going as planned. She talked about how her life was kind of falling apart and that she was obviously having issues with Josh. Now, I'll confess that reading it gave me a small sense of satisfaction. "Well, what did you expect?" was the question. However, I think there was a little part of me that felt awful. I didn't want her life to collapse. After all, all I wanted was for her to accept responsibility for her actions. She continued to play the victim, though. She asked if we could get together to chat as she concluded the message. "I need closure," she remarked, said she desired an in-person apology. I had no idea what to do. I didn't particularly want to see her again. On the one hand, however, I suppose I could appreciate the desire for some closure. I also assumed that I would never have to deal with her again. I thus concurred. We reconnected at this small coffee shop near our former residence. I arrived first, took a seat, and waited. I was sitting there the entire time. I was mentally reviewing everything as if I were getting ready for whatever justifications or apologies she could offer me when she eventually entered. I nearly failed to identify her. She had changed appearance. There was something strange about her appearance, but I'm not saying it was awful. She appeared worn down and exhausted, as though life had taken a serious toll on her in recent weeks. Certainly that wasn't the Molly I recalled. We simply sat there awkwardly for a few minutes after she took the seat across from me. Neither of us was really sure where to begin. She finally raised her voice. "Jake, I apologize," she murmured in a tremulous voice. "After giving things some thought, I've come to understand how badly I hurt you." Unsure of what to say, I nodded. An apology wasn't why I was there. I was there to listen to her and put a permanent end to this chapter. However, she continued to speak. "I should not have acted in that way." She and Josh went on. "I didn't intend for it to go that way. I wasn't really thinking." I arched an eyebrow. "Molly, you weren't thinking straight. The initials of another man were permanently inked on your body. You spent months lying to me. How can it not be clear thinking?" She fiddled with her hands while glancing down at the table. I realize it sounds awful, but I wasn't content. We seemed to be moving apart, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. That made me laugh out loud. "You chose to speak with him about it rather than with me. You believed that cheating was the answer." She remained silent. She sat there looking remorseful. However, I wasn't in the mood to give her a free pass. She was now acknowledging that she had done what she had done, after I had spent too much time trying to understand why. However, it didn't seem sufficient. Saying "I'm sorry" wasn't enough. I leaned forward and inhaled deeply. "I adored you, Molly. You know, whatever went wrong, I would have done anything to make it right. However, you denied me an opportunity. You refused to allow me in at all. You simply deceived me behind my back." She started crying. I wasn't moved, though. I had witnessed her crying previously, and it always seemed like a means of evading accountability. This time I wasn't going to fall for it. "I didn't intend for it to go this way," she muttered. "I never meant to do you harm." With a mixture of relief and irritation, I reclined in my chair. She still didn't seem to understand, which frustrated me, and a sense of relief as I was at last able to let everything out. "Yes, you did cause me pain." "Flatly," I replied. "And now you have to face the repercussions. We are no longer together, and you are to blame for it." Trying to keep herself together, she wiped her tears. "I understand," she muttered. "Right now, I simply don't know what to do. My life is a complete wreck." I gave a headshake. "Molly, that's no longer my concern. Your decisions were your own. You must now coexist with them." Then we sat for a long time in quiet. She probably realized she didn't have much else to say. There would be no significant reconciliation or closure for her. This was simply the fact of the situation. She had to lie on her bed after making it. She eventually got up after a few minutes, picked up her luggage, and said, "Thanks for meeting with me. This was what I needed." I didn't actually answer. She left after I just nodded. Suddenly, I felt as though a burden had been removed from my shoulders. It wasn't until I spoke those words that I realized how important they were. After then, the following weeks were much simpler. She had stopped texting me, and I no longer had that persistent voice in the back of my mind concerning what had transpired. It was redone. I was finally able to go on with my life, and I did just that. I resumed my routine, began spending more time with friends, and concentrated on my work. Returning to normal, or whatever my new definition of normal was, felt nice. Molly was in the past, and she intended to remain there. It wasn't simple, mind you. No, it wasn't. I would occasionally reflect on things and experience feelings of anger, sadness, or confusion. But I would always tell myself that I had made the correct decision. I refused to allow her to bring me down any longer. In actuality, there are instances when nothing can be done to stop things from falling apart. All you need to do is pick yourself up and go on. And I did just that. And so, here we are. About 6 months have passed after the divorce, and to be honest, I feel like a totally different person now. Eliminating Molly from my life was like turning off a switch, but I didn't anticipate reaching this stage so rapidly. It's strange how things that once held great significance suddenly cease to exist. In an effort to rebuild myself, I've been concentrating on me, going back to my favorite activities, spending time with friends, and just not having to worry about someone continually making me feel inadequate. The emotional burden that leaves your shoulders when you are no longer in a poisonous circumstance is astounding. Naturally, Molly wasn't done mucking things up, even if I've been having a good time. A random number texted me one day. The message was lengthy. It's one of those that need scrolling to read. When I started reading it, I realized it was from Josh, even though at first I believed it was spam. Yes, Josh. In addition to being some sort of strange apology, the letter was a sly way of explaining why things with Molly weren't going as planned. It was one of those. The part that really got to me was when he began griping about Molly, even though I didn't intend for things to go like way. It seems that their small friendship quickly soured after I departed. He remarked something along the lines of, "I thought that once you were out of the picture, things would be different between us." However, Molly is not who I initially believed her to be. He continued by saying that she was no longer the person he had been close to at work, and that she had become needy and clinging. I was laughing uncontrollably, wondering what this person was expecting. After I left the picture, he became connected with a married lady and believed that everything would be okay. It was nearly flawless. Karma seems to have struck him squarely in the face, and now he wanted to discuss it with me. No, that was not anything I was going to consider. I didn't respond. What was the purpose? He didn't have to apologize or give me an explanation. They both deserved whatever situation they had gotten themselves into, in my opinion. Let them handle one another. After a few days, Molly made another attempt to get in touch, but I was already moving on. It was a phone call this time. I was shocked when her name appeared on my computer because I hadn't heard from her since that unpleasant meeting at the coffee shop. After a brief moment of hesitation, I decided to answer out of curiosity rather than letting it go to voicemail. She sounded tremulous, like if she had been sobbing or something. "I really need to talk to you, Jake, even though I know you don't want to hear it." I let out a sigh, already exhausted from the talk we had yet to have. Molly, what is it? She went into great detail about how her relationship with Josh was deteriorating. She kept talking about how she felt bad about everything that had transpired between us, and how he wasn't treating her fairly. In fact, she admitted that I was wrong, Jake. "It wasn't until you were gone that I realized how much I needed you. Now, it could have affected me a few months ago." It could have felt validated to hear her express sadness about leaving. However, it is no longer the case. I had had enough. She didn't have to admit her error to me, since I was previously aware of it. Molly. I interrupted her. I said, "We're through. You now have to live with the decisions you made. I quote, V moved on, and you should follow suit." I heard her sniffling on the other end as she fell silent for a minute. Even though I felt horrible, I refused to become entangled in that issue again. Not after everything. I'm at a loss on what to do, she muttered. With him, I expected things to be different, but they aren't, T. What we had is what I miss. I realized then that she wasn't truly missing me. The security was missed by her. She missed having someone who would always be there for her. She didn't give a damn about me, though. Not really. She was just disappointed that her relationship with Josh hadn't turned out the way she had hoped. Molly, I'm unable to assist you, I said, attempting to maintain my composure. Now that you've made your bed, you must lie in it. And that was all. She simply hung up without saying anything further. I didn't hear from her again after that. I felt liberated after that call, as in very free. I had lost my anger. I wasn't depressed. I simply felt finished. Without all this weight on my chest, I felt as though I could breathe for the first time in a long time. In retrospect, I see that my experiences were most likely beneficial. Yes, it was terrible. It hurt and was nasty. On certain days, I also doubted that I would ever feel normal again. Now, however, I'm happy that occurred now. I was awakened. I realized what I deserved as a result, and what I will never tolerate again. We've been concentrating on myself ever since. I've picked up some new interests, gotten back in touch with old pals, and even resumed dating. It's been enjoyable, but nothing major. And for the first time, I'm not searching for someone to make things right or fill a gap. It feels pretty darn amazing to just be enjoying my life. Although it's true to some extent that time cures all wounds, it wasn't merely time for me. The topic was letting go. Letting go of the treachery, the grief, and Molly. Everything else kind of fell into place once I completed it. And if all of this has taught me anything, it's that you have no influence over what other people do. Only how you respond to it is within your power. I made my decisions and Molly made hers. I made the decision to leave and move on, and I think that was the finest choice I've ever made. That's where I am at the moment then. Even while life isn't flawless, it's far better than it was. I wouldn't exchange that for anything, to be honest.